Alright, welcome back. So, just a little recap. So we have a inventory fast array here. It contains an array of entries, and every entry contains a container ID, which can be like a player inventory, a skill bar inventory, or whatever else. We have an item tag, which can be potion, a weapon, or materials, or whatever it is that your game uses. And we have a slot index, which is where in the array is this entry stored. We have a quantity, which is the quantity of the item that we have. And then we made a component giving it the inventory that we made, and we made a bunch of requests so that we could request to add an item from the client, passing the request to the server, and the server then finally try to add the item. Right. We also made a request, a struct for the request, and it just contains the container in which we want the item to go into, the item that we want to save, and the amount that we want to save. We also made a response so that we would know the result of the operation after trying to add something. So here is the response struct that we made. It just returns a success or failure. It returns the requested amount, so what amount did we try to add. It returns the amount that was actually added, and it returns the remaining quantity. So if we did not manage to add everything, what is left to be added that we could not add. Alright, and we use this mutator that we created to actually do the operation of trying to add the item. And in here, what do? Is the first thing that we do is we check if we already have an entry. So if we already have, for example, a potion in our inventory, if we do, and we are trying to add another potion, then we just stack it on top of each other. So let's say we're trying to add 10 potions and we already have a stack of 2, well, we make it a stack of 12. Now if we don't have anything, then we just take an empty slot in the inventory and put whatever we are trying to add inside of it. And that's pretty much it. That's pretty easy so far. But what we are missing is one. Here I'm hard coding the slot because we need to make a function to go and look inside of the inventory to find an empty slot for us. And also in here we are just putting the item together, so we are just stacking it on top of each other, but we don't have a stack limit. So you don't know if maybe the stack limit of a potion might be like 10 or something, so you can't stack too much on top of each other. So you'll have to, for example, if you already have 2 and you try to add 10, so you can only add 8 to the stack, and then the 2 potion that's left, well, you just create a new slot. You just get a new slot and then put the 2 potion left inside of that new slot, creating a new stack. So you'll have a stack of 10 and a stack of 2. So this is what we're gonna work on today. So the first, let's do finding a slot indexed, and then we'll do the stacking. Alright, so let's begin. So the first thing I'm gonna do is make a new function. Let's go here. I'm gonna make a static function, int 32 find first free slot. Okay, now it's going to take in a inventory. Perfect, because we need to give it the inventory in which he's going to look for the slot in, right? And then it needs, let's give it a const f gameplay tag container id. So we give it the inventory, and now inside of the inventory in which container. So is it in the player inventory container? Is it in the weapon slot container, or whatever else we might have? So it needs to know in which container it's going to look inside of. And I'm gonna do a const f gameplay. Oh, actually no, that's all we need, I think. I'm actually going to pass in something else. I'm gonna pass in an int 32 max slots, because we will need that too. Max slot is the size of the container. So what's the, let's say for example your player inventory has, I don't know, 100 slot in it before it's completely full. So we need to know what's the size of that container. So let's create this, generate it. Okay, so now what we want to do? Well, first thing first, I want to make sure that my container ID dot is valid indeed, and also that the max slot is not 0 or less than 0, and we don't have any slot in the inventory at all. So index none if that doesn't work. Great. Now I'm going to create a t byte array. Let me make it first and then explain what it does. Slots. False max slot. And let me go grab a little comment that I have here. Explain what this is. Okay. So what this is basically is just an array that's going to contain some booleans. Okay. So right now all the bools are set to false, and just like I wrote here, we are considering false as a slot being empty. So how does that work? So we are going to create a number of use slot entries for this array, what is equal to the number of max slot that we have. So if the inventory has 100 slot, we are going to create 100 of these that will contain a bool that says true or false. If the inventory has 50 slot, then we'll make 50 of them. If it has 10, we'll make 10 of them. So that's what this is doing. And we are setting everything by default to false. And false will mean that the slot is empty. Now what we are going to do is loop over the inventory, right? And then every time we find something inside of it, we'll just mark here, we'll just change this value and say true. So we're gonna loop over the inventory and find, oh, there's a potion in the inventory at slot 0. Then we change this for slot 0 to true. And then we keep looping, and then if we don't find anything else, well, the rest are gonna be false. And then we can loop over this array and see where are the free slots and where are the slots that are not free. And then from there we can just get a slot to use here. So let's do this. Okay, so I'm gonna do a for loop. Entries, perfect. And let's actually just add a little comment here. Check every inventory entry to see which slots are already used. So let's do if entry dot container ID equals container ID. So if we found something, an entry, for example, there's a potion in there, then we check is the container ID of this entry the same as the ID of what we passed in. So if you're trying to add a potion in our inventory, in our player inventory, we need to make sure that what we found is also inside of the player inventory, so that we can stack it on top of each other. Because it might be, let's say, the entry that we found might be in the I don't know, in the extra inventory of our character. Then in that case, well, we don't want to add it in the extra inventory, we are trying to add it in a player inventory. So we don't care about it, we're gonna just skip it. So that's basically what this is doing, just going over all the entries and checking if it's in the same inventory as the one we're trying to add this item into. And also we are going to check the entry dot slot index. Oh my god. Okay, it did it for me. Perfect. Yeah, so we are going to check the slot index to make sure that the slot that we found is valid. Okay, so we found an entry, we need to make sure that the slot is valid. So how do we do that? Well, we just check if it's greater than 0 or equal to 0, because an array starts at slot 0 and then 1, 2, 3, etc. So you can't have -1 as a slot index, for example. And also we are going to check if we are within the boundary of the container. So max slot is the size, the max size of the container. So we just have to be within that range. Okay, so let's add a comment actually here. Let's do only mark slots that belong to this container and are in valid range. That's what this is doing. And then we can take the use slot and do this. So we got an entry, we check if the container is the same, if the slot index is valid, and if we are within the range. Now we take that array that we created earlier, and then since we have the same number, so for example if we had 10 slots in the inventory, we created 10 of these. So all we have to do is take the slot index of the entry. So for example, if it's in the slot 0, then we change the entry at slot 0 of this array that we created, we change that to true. So if the entry was at slot 10 in the inventory, then at slot 10 in the array here, we'll just change that to true. Let's keep going. I'm gonna add a command, scan from the start and return the first slot that is still free. Okay, here we go. So now what I want to do is to, since I've populated this array with true or false depending on if we have an entry or not, now I can loop over it. So I'm going to do a for loop, int 32 slot indexed. I think that's correct. Yep, gonna loop over it, and then if used slot, not this. If used slot indexed, continue. So what this is doing is just checking the value of the bool, right? So if it's false at this indexed of the array here, then we know that it's empty, which is what we want. But in this case, we are checking if use slot at this index is true. If it's true, we continue. So that's what this is doing. Just checking, is the boolean true in this entry, in this slot here? And if it is, well, we can't do anything because it's already been taken. This slot is already been taken. If it's not true, then we can just return the index, because then it's an empty slot, so we can use that. And then here, if we didn't get anything, we can just return index none. And now we can use that here. So what did I call it again? Find free blah blah blah, and it requires the inventory. it requires the container. The container tag is in the request, so we get the request container ID, and it needs a max slot, which I'm going to just hard code for now until we add the ability to get the number of slot a container has. Okay, so now I guess we should add the functionality to get this value from the container. So we need to know what's the max slot of a container. And in order to do that, I'm going to create a like a configuration file for every container. So what we will have to do is just, if we're trying to add something in, let's say, the player container, well, we can use that config file as a reference. So we go and check the config file and say, okay, I'm trying to add something in the player inventory container. What is the max slot allowed for this container? And then we look through the config file that we create. We can edit that config file and say, oh, the max slot for the player inventory is 10, and then we can retrieve that value. So this is what we're gonna do. So in order to do that, I'm gonna go to my tabs folder actually and create a new folder. I'm gonna call this config, and inside of it I'm going to add a file. I think it's fine, just a file. I'm gonna call this it container config.h. Alright, and let's make this file. It's asking me if I want to push this. Nope. Okay, so let's set up the file first. Include core minimal. Include oops, what's going on here? Include. Let's add the gameplay tag container also in there, and also include, I know we will need the it container config.generated.h, otherwise it won't compile. Here we go. Alright, now I'm going to make a struct. Here we go, and call this f container config. Cool. Make a U property. We can make this edit anywhere, blueprint read write, and give it a category of inventory. Okay, so f gameplay tag container ID. So we will create one of these struct for each container, right? So we need to know, okay, this is going to be for example, the player inventory. We can put this tag here and then set some configuration for it. So let's make a new U property here. For now, I'm just going to add one. I'm just going to add the max slot. The other 100 by default. That's fine. All right. Oh, and let's make sure this is blueprint type. Okay. So now we have a config file. It will know what container it's a config for, and this is the configuration. One of the properties that we'll have. We'll add more. For now, we only need the max slots. Cool. We don't need that anymore. Let's close it. And I'm gonna go in my inventory component. Actually, here, let's add a config. So I'm gonna add that here. Let's do a U property. U property. Category can be just inventory. It doesn't matter. Inventory, and call this and make it TRA actually, because we want to be able to add many of them, one per container. So container config we need to include the file. So let's do the include. It's in types, config. It's in inventory types config, and here we go. And here I'm gonna call this container configs. That's fine. And let's also make a getter for it. So I'm going to make a function here called get container max slots. It will take in a const f gameplay tag container ID, and this can be a const too. So now what it's doing is this is going to look inside the container configs that we have and find the configs for whatever container we are requesting, and then returning its max slot. So let's create that. I'm gonna take this, put this down here. Okay, so what do we want to do in here? Well, we're just going to first loop over the container config. Loop over all the configs that we have, right? And then if configs that container ID is the same as the one we are requesting, and then we can return the config max slot. Otherwise, we just return 0. Great. Let's compile and see what that looks like, so you have an idea of what we're doing. Alright, now I'm in the engine. I'm just going to go to the player controller. And if I click on my inventory component now, I have the container bit here. You can see if I click plus, we can add one. And it requires a container ID, which we can give it the player inventory, and then we can decide the amount of slot that we want. It can be 10, can be 100, can be whatever you want. And then you can create more like this. For example, you could make a let's say a container ID dot equipment inventory. Okay, so let's set that here, and then your equipment inventory might have, like, let's say for example in your game you can have 2 weapons, 3 pieces of armors, and 1 accessories or something. So that's like 6 slots, right? So you can set it to 6. So now your equipment inventory will have a max slot of 6. Cool. So that's that. I'm just gonna delete that actually. Don't need that right now. Okay, let's set this up so that we are actually using it. Okay, and let's do this. Okay. So in my try add item authority, before we actually call for the addition of the item, I'm going to make an int 32. Let's make a const. We don't want to change this, so a const container max slot, and there we go. We call the function that we just made, and we give it the container ID. And it's going to return the container slot, the max container slot. Great. Now we need to pass this information inside of here also. So let's modify this. Oh wait, I already did. No wait, no, that's this one. Wrong function. Wrong function. So we'll need a const int 32 container. What do I call it? Container max. Alright, so now this takes this. If we go back here, we can now pass in the container max slot that we just got. So container max slot. Great. And in here now it's going to complain, of course. const int32 container max slot, and this is getting quite long, so let me just do this. That's fine. Alright, and let's use it. Where do we want to use that? Well, right here where I'm hard coding the max slot. So container max slot. There we go. Cool. And let's compile and test this. Okay, now I'm back in the engine. Let's go to the player controller again. Click on my inventory component just to make sure that this is set. Yep, of a 100 slot. And again, when we press 1, it's going to add an item. It's going to add a potion to my player inventory.